What's up, guys? So I am super stoked today for a few reasons, actually. I got a new light, the Aperture 120D Mark II. So let me know if you like this lighting. I have very limited space, so I have to put it where it is. So I also have this freaking awesome sign. That's actually my business name. I got that as a birthday present from my girlfriend. It is freaking awesome. Today, we're gonna talk about how you guys can fly all the way to Europe. I don't know which way that is. All the way to Europe for 21 days. That's 3 whole weeks for under $1,000. And yes, this is from the US to Europe, because if you live in Europe, it's going to cost you like $50 to fly around for like 3 weeks. I also have an Excel spreadsheet I made over the past like 17 hours that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. And let's get to it. So the Excel spreadsheet I'll get to at the end. It's kind of, I'm gonna explain how it's formatted and such, so when you do look at it, you can understand it. So I'm gonna put that download in the link below. While you're down there, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button if you wanna see more content like this. If you wanna skip straight to the Excel spreadsheet, go to this time right here. I'll put it somewhere. And I go in depth in explaining the Excel spreadsheet, but I highly recommend watching the rest of this video so that you don't miss out on any important details. I wanted to start out by saying this does not include your expenses that you will have when you're there. So it's not gonna count towards your food and whatever else you buy while you're there, because I don't know how much you're gonna be spending on food and clothes and stuff. The price I'm talking about, under $1,000, is for your flights and your Airbnb / places to stay, which is still a really good deal. So you have a few options, and I'll get into that in a second. But first, I just wanted to mention a few things. One, you can go for cheaper. It is possible to even go for under $800. Depends on the different factors that I'll get into. I'm gonna try to keep this video as short as possible, but I highly recommend watching this whole thing because it is going to explain a lot of things that may not make sense or may not help you get a cheaper flight or places to stay when you try to go. Numero uno. Why flights are priced the way they are. There's a ton of YouTube videos where I actually learned this information from. Flights are priced so cheap in Europe itself, which is great because there's so many airlines and cheap budget airlines like Ryanair, EasyJet, etc. And they basically bring other companies' flight prices down because those other companies can't really compete when someone's offering a $20 flight across to Europe. That's the first thing. The next thing is the different times of year to fly. So you want to kind of fly in a time of the year where it's not super popular, but it's not super unpopular. So if you go like in the middle of the winter, and let's just say February, I'm not sure if that's an exact month, but it's going to be expensive because there's not a lot of people, not a lot of demand to go to Europe at that time. So you're gonna wanna try to find a time that's kind of busy, kind of not. The best time of year I have found to fly from the United States to Europe is March, April, May, end of May-ish. So once you hit June, it kind of goes up. August, it kind of goes down, but the prime time I have found is between middle April to the middle May for a 3-week period. And then one last thing I wanted to mention about the prices of flights is when you're looking for a flight from the United States to Europe, you can't pick some just random airport in the United States. It has to be a big one. So you were talking about New York City, Chicago, maybe Dallas. In my chart, I did include LAX. So the 3 airports I included in my Excel sheet are Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City. I looked at Denver, but it was way too expensive, so I didn't even want to include it. And then also Dallas, I didn't look into, or other big airports in the southern region. So if you're from the southern region, sorry, you're gonna have to do your own research for the first flight, but I did do the rest of the work for the whole other 3-week portion of your trip. So for example, let's say you're looking for a flight from Chicago to London. You don't wanna just look at like a 5-day span that you're gonna stay. So There's a really good video, I believe by the channel from Brightside, that explained this very well. The closer you get to the flight date, the more expensive it gets. But there's also a point where if you book too far away, the prices are also pretty high. So you gotta kind of find that middle point. What I would say is 2 to 3 months is a really good time to look for flights. However, I have found that between right now and October until the end of December is a very good time to find flights from the United States to Europe that are super cheap, even though that's like a 6-month difference. So normally people say 2 to 3 months to book, but in my opinion, if you're going to a different country such as Europe, I would say book around 5 to 6 months in advance, maybe 4 to 6 months, just depending on what you find. So the biggest thing when you're looking for flights to Europe is how long you're going to stay. If you're gonna stay for 5 days, your flights are gonna be very expensive because the turnaround time is less. And the longer you stay there, the cheaper your flights become because the more time you're there. There's a certain name for the time that you're staying there for an airline. I don't remember the name, but just remember that. Just don't look for really short trips. Obviously, if you're going to Europe, you don't really want to spend 5 days there anyway. You want to spend more because it's an 8-hour flight, so you don't want to waste your time. So that's kind of how the airlines work and the prices work. All right, let's get into the second topic here, and that is my previous trip to Europe as to why I'm doing this video. So this previous summer, around the end of May into the beginning of June, I took a trip to Europe from Chicago. I live in Michigan, so it was like a 3-hour drive to Chicago. And I went from Chicago to London, then we went from London to Paris, Paris to Rome, Rome to Santorini, Greece to Venice, and then back to London, and then we went home. This was a 3-week span, and we all spent under $1,200 a piece on the Airbnb and flights alone, and then obviously a little bit more for expenses. So I'm making this video because every time I tell somebody how much I paid for this trip, they're like, what? No, you did not, son. That's not possible because that's a lot of places. So I wanted to educate everybody so they can do what I did because I never thought I would actually go to Europe. It was a really cool experience, so I want you guys to have the ability to experience this as well. So my last trip, we could have spent less than $1,200 per person, and that is because we splurged on our place to stay in Santorini. We even got an Airbnb that had a hot tub inside the Airbnb. You don't have to splurge, and if we didn't, it would have cost around $1,000 a person. And I keep saying per person because this is relevant, and I'll get into that into the next step. Let's just say we had technically 4 people go. So let's get into point number 3, which is how the trip itself works. So key number 1 is you want to use London as a hub. So there are a few places in Europe that you could use as a hub, but from the research that I've done, I have found that London is one of the best places to use as a hub. And by hub, I mean you could either land there and stay there for a few days and enjoy it, or you could just land there to get a connecting flight somewhere else, because it's actually cheaper to fly to London from Chicago and then book a different flight from London to somewhere else than it would be to find a flight that is all priced in one and bundled that connects from London. You could probably use somewhere in France, maybe Paris, or somewhere in Italy. However, you're probably going to find cheaper flights to London. And when I say cheap, I'm talking about $350-ish round trip from Chicago to London, New York to London, and LAX to London. Yeah, or even less, like $318 round trip. $318, not euros, dollars. So let's keep that in mind. The cool thing about the London hub, that I call it, is that you can literally fly anywhere in Europe for under $50 a majority of the time. And when I say anywhere, I'm talking about the big places. If you try to go to some random small city in Europe, it's probably not going to be under $100 or $50. It's going to be more because it's not a very popular place. But if you go to a popular place such as London to Paris, you're going to be spending like 20 bucks on a flight. Yeah, $20. And like I mentioned before, you don't have to stay in London either. If you already have been to London before, or you just don't really care for it, you can literally use it as a hub to fly into and then just immediately leave, but it's still going to be cheaper that way. If you find a cheaper flight, let me know, and I'll take a look into that. Then you have 2 options once you get to Europe. You can stay in an Airbnb or a hotel, Or the second option is you can stay in a hostel. So a hostel is just like a shared hotel room, basically, with like 6 or 8 or 10 other people in bunk beds, and it's kind of just a place to stay and sleep, not to hang out in and have a good time. You literally just use it as a sleeping measure. Some of them have bars in it. It's a really awesome place to meet new people and, you know, make new friends, so I highly recommend it. But I have like $5,000 to $6,000 in camera gear, and I can't necessarily trust it at night with other people I don't really know. I also am kind of a luxurious person. I would really like to stay in somewhere nice where I can have my own bed. So I'm kind of picky, but if it came down to it, you can get a hostel, and those are only like $10 to $15 per night, whereas an Airbnb is like $150, $100 per night, which, you know, depends on how many people you're going with. You could probably save an extra like $300 to $400. So it's all up to you how much luxury is worth to you. And then lastly, like I mentioned before, I traveled with 4 people on my trip. So we split the cost of the Airbnbs by 4, which brought it down quite significantly. So it only ended up being like $100 per night instead of, you know, $400. If you want to go with just 2 people, it's going to cost you a little bit more, and that's the time when I would probably stay in a hostel, because Airbnbs between 2 people is going to be a little more expensive, and you're kind of going to rise the amount you have to pay for the whole trip by about 1/4. So instead of it being $1,000, it'd be $1,400, because you would double the price of the Airbnbs, which was about half of the cost of the trip. And then lastly, I wanted to go over the actual Excel spreadsheet that I made so you guys can understand it, and so you guys can use it to your discretion and, you know, find cheap flights and go to Europe. So I'm going to explain this in depth so that you guys kind of understand my thought process on this as well. This is the new one I made for you guys. This is a new updated one as of today. These prices may fluctuate a little bit up and down. I would imagine in the next month to 2 months, by the end of the year, these prices will stay the same or fluctuate by $10, $20, give or take. So this is the first one. I gave you guys a ton of options. Like, I'm talking like 2.5 months worth of options of this time period you can pick from to go to Europe. What I did is this column here is from Chicago to London, and then from London back to Chicago. This is your round trip flight price right here. I'll talk about this grayed out area in a second, but the first date I found that was decently cheap was March 29th, and then I used a 3-week period, 21 days of time to go on this trip, just because 3 weeks is a good amount of time for yourself to go to Europe, and it's a good time, or a good amount of time, so that you get a cheaper flight for your round trip to London. It starts with March 29th to April 19th, and your price would be $348. And then if you keep going over to the right, this is assuming you were to stay in London for 3 or 4 days, and you would depart London on April 2nd. And then you would go to Paris, which would be $33. And then same thing, this is assuming you stayed in Paris for 3 days, you departed on April 5th, and then it's cost you $36. And then you stayed in Paris for 4 days, you leave on April 9th, and it was $42. And then you stayed in Berlin for 5 days, and then you flew to Amsterdam for a few days, and then you're back to London. There's a few things I wanted to say first before I get more into it. One, you don't have to go on these exact dates. That's kind of how this is set up. You can pick literally any dates you want. I just kind of set them up so you spend a little bit of time in each place. When I went to Europe, I went to 5 different cities, 4 countries, and that was a lot of travel. I highly recommend doing a maximum of 4 cities. If you can find high-speed train tickets cheaper than flights, I highly recommend it, because it's a lot less stress going on a train than it is on a plane because of the airport and such. But that's getting away from the point. So as you can see, if you were to do this entire trip plan right here, it would cost you $502 in flights, which is extremely cheap, but it's still not the cheapest one. And the only reason I did this is so that you could see what combinations worked the best. Future me here, and I realized I made a mistake with the Excel spreadsheet, but I will try to fix this before uploading it. If you look here, the dates are from March 29th to April 19th. However, when you look over here, the very last departure date back to London is April 14th, which is not April 19th, which means there's an extra 4 days in here that are unaccounted for. You can either shift this entire column up 5, which would bring April 19th from here to here, and then it would be exact. Or I will try to fix this when I upload the Excel sheet so that it's already fixed. However, like I mentioned, you don't really need to follow exactly the line that's here. It's just an example of how much it could cost. But these grayed out ones are in case you didn't want to go to London for a long time or at all. So this very first grayed out date is if you go from Chicago to London, land in London, and then immediately that same day, you go to Paris for $35. This means you're not going to stay in London at all. If you were to pick this next option down, this means you're going to stay in London for 1 day. Maybe you just need to stay in London so you can catch up on sleep or rest or get used to the time zone, and then you want to leave the next day to go to Paris. And then, so on and so forth. This would be staying 2 days, this would be staying 3 days, and then eventually staying 4 days. So it's all up to you how many days you want to stay in London and how many days is worth it to you. For example, let's say you wanted to leave, or maybe you have a specific dates you need to leave on and get back by. So let's say you have the April 20th through May 10th off of work or whatever, and you wanted to stay in London for 1 day. So the way I have it set up is that you would stay in London for 4 days, and you don't want to stay for 4, you want to stay for 1. So you would just find April 21st, which is right here, and you see that it's $32. And let's say after London, you wanted to stay in Paris for 5 days because you really, really, really want to see Paris. Instead of going to April 24th, which would be 3 days, you would find April 26th, which is here, and that's $40. So as you're doing this, you would just add them all up to see how much it's going to cost. And then let's say you wanted to stay in Berlin for only like 3 or 4 days. You would just go down and find the 3 or 4 day period, and then you see that it's $25, and then you find how much time you would spend left in Amsterdam, and then you find your way home. Another way you could do this is you could just do a quick equal sign here, and then you could literally just do the sum. You could just do the sum function here, and then you could just find the dates that you wanted. So let's say I wanted to leave here, stay for that many days in London, that many days in Paris, that many days in Berlin, and that many days in Amsterdam. And then you would just hit enter, and then you see that it costs you $521 in flights. Now, the ones I just picked don't work because of the time slots, so that's just an example. I did the same exact thing in New York to London. It's the same thing, except for I picked different cities for you guys because I wanted to change it up a little bit. So these ones were from New York to London, London back to New York, and then to Barcelona, Geneva, which is in Switzerland. It's on like the border. You could go anywhere in Switzerland if you wanted to, and then from Geneva to Venice, and then from Venice back to London. These were actually $19 from Venice back to London. That's like a $20 bill in your wallet. So I just did that for fun to show you there are other options. And then I did the same thing from LAX and just used the same cities because it does take a long time for me to do this. But you can literally pick any of these dates you want. This is literally just a huge Excel spreadsheet of prices of flights at different dates at different times of the years. The only things that in this Excel sheet that are really important to look at are the dates for your round trip to London and what cities they're coming from. Chicago, New York, LAX. If you wanted to stay longer, you can. The round trip flight prices are very similar if you're within a 5-day plus or minus period of the ones I have picked here. So if you wanted to stay 25 days instead of 21, you could go until May 15th or 16th, whatever. And you would just pick flights that add up and end on May 16th right here, and just make sure you're back to London May 16th. So that's kind of the basis of my Excel spreadsheet. The last thing I wanted to mention about it is with these cities that I pre-picked, it does not matter. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, you can literally go to almost any major or well-known city in Europe and the prices will be very similar. From the data that I have found, this is the engineer in me talking, most flights from major cities to other major cities are below $50. And by below $50, they're normally around $20 to $35 on average to get from one city to another. Some of these prices are around $60 to $100, and those like are some on random days that might have a surge or some reason they're more expensive. But you can literally just pick the day before or after, and it'll be $26 instead of $96. So it doesn't matter what cities you pick. And to prove that, here is a screenshot I took when I was looking at Google flights. But if you look here from Barcelona on April 1st, as you can see, the prices literally anywhere are around $20 to $30 on average. I mean, you can go back to London for $20, you can go to Paris for $20, you can go anywhere in Spain for $20 or Portugal. You can go to Ibiza, I think is on here for like $35. You can go to Rome, Venice, Milan, Frankfurt, Munich, Amsterdam, literally anywhere in Europe for a $20 bill that's just in your wallet. Like this right here is $100. This right here will get you literally to all of the cities you need to go in Europe for a 5-location trip. And you're going to 4 locations. You have an extra 20 to set aside. That's including fees and taxes, that $20. I'm gonna tell you, 20. You saw it. You can do the same thing with London. You can pick London right here, and it'll still be $20 anywhere. There's a few places where it's expensive, like going to Santorini, Greece. It's ranging between $67 and $130. We went to Santorini last minute, and we spent a little bit more on our flights, and we still spent under $550 per person on flights going to a place that cost $130 to get to. Sorry, I'm just really excited because this is just ridiculous. If you can ever find a cheap round trip flight from anywhere you live in the United States to London, you're golden. Because even on off season, these flights are between $50 and $100 per place, which is still dirt cheap. It cost me $350 to fly from Grand Rapids, Michigan to LAX, or even Chicago. Yeah, let that sink in. That's like this far compared to going this far, and you're going to different countries, not even within the same country. There is one last thing I wanted to mention because I bet you already wrote the comment down and you're like, well, so let me just address the situation that's in your pants right now. Baggage. But James, it costs like $50 per bag to check a bag in. Yeah, I know. Don't let that fool you. I will tell you right now, the size of your suitcase of a carry-on is a lot smaller in Europe than it is in the United States. It's about maybe like 6 to 7 inches linearly smaller in Europe. So quadruple check when you are doing your trip stuff to make sure your suitcase is tiny. How did I go to Europe without paying all these baggage fees? Because I'll tell you right now, I didn't. I had to once, which was annoying. We went for 3 weeks, all right? And you're probably like, well, you got to fit 3 weeks of clothes into your suitcase, so you're gonna have to check the suitcase because that's a lot of stuff. Plus, you're gonna buy stuff while you're there, so you got to be smart about it. You buy a carry-on piece of luggage that is precisely the size that you need for carry-on in Europe. Keyword Europe, because on U.S. flights it's a lot bigger. Once you get to a budget airline in Europe, though, they will measure it down to the 0.1 millimeter. Yes, millimeter, because they're in Europe. So don't mess with them in Europe because they will measure the crap out of your suitcase. I'll tell you that right now. Buy a suitcase that fits the regulations in Europe. Make sure you look up all the flights that you have and make sure your suitcase fits all of those flights, not just one of them, because some of them are a little bit different because that's how they get you is with the suitcases. So you're obviously not going to fit 3 weeks worth of clothes into one tiny suitcase. So the key here is to find an Airbnb that has a washing machine in it. Yes, a lot of them do, and a few of ours did. And we ended up just washing our clothes a couple of times on our trip so that we had clean clothes again. We left a little bit of room in them as well so that we were still able to buy stuff while we were there. We almost ended up shipping some stuff home because we bought a little bit too much. But we ended up fitting it all in the suitcases. We had to use the extension, and that's when I had to pay for the $50 fee to check my bag, is because I used the extension. It got too big and they weren't happy about it. that's basically it. I'm sorry, this was probably like a 20 to 30 minute video. If you have any specific questions, or if you're curious about anything, or you think I'm wrong about something, or you want to know more stuff, or you're just any questions at all, put them in the comments down below. I kind of consider myself to be a pretty dang good guru of travel now because I have done so much research into it. I'll put that Excel sheet in the description below. Don't forget to destroy that subscribe button and the like button if I saved you some money, or if you just like this video. That's that, and I'll see you guys on the next one.